Good morning, members. I call the Committee of Whole on Bill Number 3, Budget Measures Implementation Act 2024 to order. We are on Clause 2. Shall Clause 2 pass? Recognizing the member from Kamloops, North Thompson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, just picking up where we left off yesterday, just to clarify, really what I'm getting at is the government essentially, with this proposal, just trying to backstop $1 billion worth of equity investment. In other words, it could be $10 million here, $20 million there. They're just essentially writing for lack of a better term, a personal guarantee, a government guarantee to backstop the borrowing, and it's up to $1 billion worth of equity value? Or is it that it's the carrying costs of $1 billion to the books, and it would actually be a much higher value of equity that's actually being backstopped?
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So we're backstopping the loan itself, and if it's defaulted, it would we would pick up the interest on the loan.
Member.
Okay, thank you. So that makes it clear. So, and part of the reason I was asking was, and obviously with the backdrop of what we just saw today with S&P and the credit downgrade, I was trying to figure out what the overall exposure to government would be in terms of potential debt liability that would be taken into account. But it sounds like that's capped at $1 billion. But there is, as I referenced yesterday, 204 First Nations in the province, so $1 billion doesn't actually go very far when you're talking equity stake into projects. How is the government planning on deciding who actually qualifies for this program when applications start to come in?
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So we are co-developing a framework with First Nations right across the province. And through that, there will be a process developed. And it's important to note, we're not allocating money to each First Nations. What we're expecting is nations to come by themselves to look for equity funding or equity support, or there could be a group of nations coming forward that might want to, a collective of First Nations that be looking at a project. So we'll be looking at the projects on a project-by-project basis. And again, the process will be developed with First Nations and also with Canada, because we are expecting Canada to come on to be a partner, and with industry. We'll be consulting with industry as well, because I just want to remind the member that industry asked for this as well. Industry is very interested in this. They want to get involved with First Nations and recognize that First Nations didn't have the ability to go and borrow money without someone backstopping, and so we're doing that backstopping for them. So it'll be done with industry as well.
Member.
Thank you. Well, and I was only using the 204 as a reference to basically highlight that this will likely, at some point, winners and losers are going to have to be picked with programs or projects. And when I read the back of this bill, it appears that this becomes law on royal assent. And so the lack of detail at this point is frankly a little bit surprising, because I think that will lead to further frustration. So we've been watching in the last week and a half in real time what can happen unfold when government money's at play and people can apply and try to access government grants or government backstopping, government help for their various projects. There needs to be an adjudication done of those applications. There then needs to be a final determination. Will the adjudication be done by government, or will it be done by a contracted company, as we're seeing unfold with the Minister of Energy and Mines right now, and the debacle that's happening with the Go Electric program under Clean BC? Or will it be kept internally, and that adjudication will happen strictly within ministerial and ministry responsibilities within the government?
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I do want to remind the member that there was a lot of discussion with First Nations about this, and they're very happy about this, because they see this as a way of moving forward to be able to invest in projects across the province, and especially projects that are on their traditional territories in collaboration with other companies. So we're in the process of developing the framework. There's, developing policies on assessing the programs and how it's all going to work, but the member needs to know that all the program is under the oversight of Treasury Board and Cabinet. That work will be done by through the Ministry of Finance. So we'll develop the framework of policies, which is started. We want to be thoughtful with this. We need to take the right time to make sure that we're doing this right. This is a significant initiative for not only for the province, but for First Nations in the province, and also for other companies in the province that want to develop partnerships with First Nations. So we want to make sure that we get this right.
Member.
Thank you, and just maybe to be clear for the minister, I'm not taking issue with the program itself whatsoever. I think it's a good initiative for Indigenous nations to be able to try to advance economic opportunities in their own area. BC United's come out with very similar statements in Prince George long before the budget came out on a very similar program at the Natural Resource Forum in January. So it's not about that. It's about trying to find out how this is actually intended to work with the government. And the question was actually, is the government intending to use outside consultants to adjudicate the process of deciding who actually gets money out of this fund or not, or the backstopping out of this fund for their equity play or not? We're seeing with the Energy and Mines Minister play out right now the significant concerns and problems, to the point that the government literally had to do a 180-degree turn yesterday in real time, which is unprecedented in this place, to suddenly agree to an Auditor General review versus Thursday saying no Auditor General review was needed or warranted, and saying the same on Wednesday, and not wanting to answer a question on Tuesday. And so the question today to this minister is really around the process of this, and will the adjudication and the handling of the decision-making be 100% internal to government, or is it the government's intention to go down the same road as we saw the Energy Minister go and hire outside consultants to adjudicate this program?
Minister.
Thank you. And as the minister has said, she got new information on the weekend, which led to the changes this week, and I think that should be on the record. I also have said that we are developing the policy. We will look at what's going to work best for this initiative with Indigenous nations, with industry, working together to say what is going to work best. We want to make sure we get it right, and that's the way it's going to be done.
Member.
So again then, we be faced with the situation where you have a nation wanting to get an equity stake. The minister yesterday used a mine as an example, probably a very relevant example when you consider you're going to have mine or oil and gas or forestry being the predominant land-based type uses that would require larger equity stakes to try to buy into a part of a project, and those projects typically go out and find equity partners to fund the operation of whatever project it is they're working on. What is the intention of government then if you have one nation saying they want to buy an equity stake in a mine that's working through its permitted stage, and a neighboring nation saying they don't want that mine to proceed? Which nation's opinion will the government take as the reason to advance or not advance backstopping an equity play on a project? Will it be that it has to have unanimous support of neighboring nations, and especially in areas where there's conflicting opinions about whose territory the mine or the natural resource project's actually located in, or if the project traverses across many different jurisdictions in the case of a pipeline? How is the government setting out to actually decide whether or not that's a make or break feature of this program?
Minister.
Thank you, Chair, and I want to thank the member for the question, because these are good questions, and they're all questions that are going to be developed as part of the framework. They're all they're the policies that are going to be looked at to make sure that we're working in collaboration with First Nations and industry to make sure that we're doing it right.
Thank you. Well, again, this becomes law on royal assent, and so I think as much clarity as we can actually have today really would be helpful, and I think there's a lot of nations, as the minister rightly has pointed out, that will be very interested in this and want to get the ball rolling. And although it may seem like a year from now that the 200 million would really come into play for next year, by the time this budget is passed and that, we're talking a few short months. These are usually equity decisions that take months upon months. So, April 1st next year will be here before we know it. And you could have a lineup out the door of people wanting to access that 200 million very right off the hop, or at least a portion of the 200 million. So it is troubling that there's not more certainty as to how some of these issues will be at play. Will oil and gas projects be eligible under this fund? There's a lot of concern around emissions and emission profile and GHG profiles. So will there be a particular type of industry that just will not be entertained by government, or is it any and all industry or any and all equity type requests will be considered by government?
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So again, those are all policies that we're going to be developing in collaboration with First Nations and industry. I also want to point out that if you look on the budget on page 62 and 63, there's a topic box which actually lists all the things we're going to be looking at. Like, it's up to the nations to come to us and say what they're interested in getting involved with, what kind of projects they want to be involved in. It's self-determination by nations, and we will be working with them and with Canada to make sure because Canada is very much needs to be a part of this as well. So we will be working all together on the policies and as part of the framework and moving forward. But again, it's the nations. It's part of the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. It's not up to us to tell them what projects they need to be involved in. It's up to the nations working together with industry as well as with Canada. And it's also, the people still have to follow the laws of the province and would be guided by the laws that we have in place.
Member.
Thank you. On part 4 of clause 2, it says Treasury Board may direct that the balance of the special account be reduced by an amount equal to any part of the balance that Treasury Board considers is not required for the purposes of the special account. So is that to mean that although in theory right now Treasury Board would appear to have $200 million next year to access, Treasury Board could decide that in fact they only need $100 million and decide to reduce that down just regardless of how many applications may or may not be out there?
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the loan guarantees, what the member's referring to, that doesn't change. But what does change is this money is about the 10 million. So, and Treasury Board, what that clause says is it has the ability to balance the revenue based on the needs of the account as it's utilized. So TB has oversight, Treasury Board has oversight as to what's spent and what's coming in and out. So Treasury Board is actually, will be monitoring this.
Member.
Well, thank you, but just to be clear, the special account starts with 10 million this year, but then it is projected to have another 200 million added next year, and for each of the 5 years, I thought was the intention of this section was the 200 million a year. So can I get clarification then what the 200 million a year for 5 years the minister's been talking about?
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the 200 million is a loan guarantee. It's got nothing to do with spending. It's underwriting a loan. So the only time it becomes to do with spending is if they default on the loan. Then it does. Otherwise, we're not spending money.
Member.
Thank you. So the reason I was asking for the clarification around this is, we just went through at public accounts, the updated Auditor General report, again, another dissenting opinion by the Auditor General, worried about how the Indigenous revenue sharing for gaming is showing on the books. And so I just wanted to clarify and make sure there's not just basically essentially a holding account for the backstopping that has 200 million a year in cash sitting there. It's just really, it's going to be basically a paper transaction on the balance sheet showing that there's a potential liability of 200 million sitting there, but the payments, the regular payments for that 200 million of borrowing would be undertaken by the First Nations and their equity share. So I get that. That's all. I just wanted to make sure we were all on the same page. In terms of Part 6, so it says, despite Section 72(3) of the Financial Administration Act, the Minister of Finance may, on behalf of the government, guarantee the repayment of all or part of a loan by a person if the loan is to assist First Nations in acquiring equity interest in the business organizations involved in projects in British Columbia. So that all seems pretty straightforward, that the minister has that ability. And then it says on 7, a guarantee may only be given under subsection 6, which is what I just read, if prior approval of Treasury Board has been obtained. However, if memory serves, I believe it was this minister's predecessor changed the rules around who could actually make final Treasury Board decisions on certain situations, and enabling the chair or the vice chair to unilaterally make decisions without Treasury Board approval and basically go back and inform Treasury Board of the decisions after the fact. Would this type of a decision qualify for that scenario?
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Chair. What the member's referring to is it was a process called minor minutes to be expedient, and that was for things that are, lower cost, things that could be done and just to be expedient. Because of the prominence of this initiative, I believe that all decisions need to go to a full Treasury Board to have that full discussion at Treasury Board, and that's the direction we'll be moving in.
Member.
Thank you. Well, that's the closest to a definition we've actually been able to receive, because when I questioned at length before, we always got very vague answers of what level of a decision would actually qualify under those provisions or not when it was first introduced. So I appreciate the answer there. In terms of timelines for these provisions, mindful that we are not only up against the clock for noting the hour, but also up against the clock for a writ drop. And we talked about that in Clause 1. So we're all well aware what the date of the writ drop is now. The reality is government pretty much starts to grind to a bit of a standstill in any government, regardless of political stripe. This is just fact, how it works. And then it takes a little while to ramp up after an election again, regardless of outcome of election. There's new ministers and portfolios and all of that. What is the timeline, given the April 1st is when technically First Nations would have the ability next year to start accessing this and start asking for approvals, how it's been laid out by the government, to actually have, what happens with overlapping claim areas, what happens if one nation wants a project, the other nation does not want the project, what happens about things like oil and gas and natural gas projects that would span multiple jurisdictions in terms of traditional territories, where you may or may not have consensus, transmission corridors for hydro lines and energy needs that way, where you might have a nation that wants the dam, but you'd have a nation that says we don't want transmission lines, so you can't move the electricity anywhere, and that's going to come up the works on an equity stake in a power production capacity when we're up against a 2030 deadline and BC Hydro's call for power right now. So how is all that going to be reconciled? And what is the timeline between now and basically April 1st, given that we do have an election almost dead center of this time frame that I'm talking about?
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So what the member's asking, again, I'll say that decisions that he's referring to are all things that are going to be part of the framework development with in collaboration with First Nations and industry and Canada. I have asked staff to move this forward to expedite the development of this in a timely manner, because we know that we know that there's actually projects out there, nations who are thinking that this is a project that we potentially could get the backstopping of their loan for. So there are some, there's not hundreds of them, there's not many of them in that sense, but we know that we want to be thoughtful with this. We want to make sure we get it done right. We want to make sure that this is going to be the project, like this initiative is going to support those projects that nations are talking about. And there's, there's all kinds of projects that nations are talking about, everything from, power, as the member said, and also mining, but also agriculture. I mean, there's a number of different projects, excuse me, that different nations have mentioned that they think that would fit in with this initiative. So our goal is to get it done as quickly as we can, but making sure that we do it right with the due diligence and consultation that needs to be done as well.
Noting the hour.
I move the committee rise, report progress, and ask leave to sit again.
Members, the question is that the committee rise, report progress, and seek leave to sit again. Those in favor, please indicate aye. Aye. Those opposed, motion is carried. This committee stands adjourned.